This month on Exploring Wine Regions, we're talking about the historic region of Champagne. Champagne is a region in northeastern France, just 45 minutes outside of Paris. And Champagne has two main sections, which is where most of the regions are in the main area around Reims. And then a little bit to the south, you just have one other subsection called Aube, all the way in the south. The area and the soil types in Champagne are pretty unique because you're getting almost all chalky soils with a little bit of granite as well mixed in. So what you're going to see in Champagne is you're going to see that minerality, that very typical chalk coming through on the wines in most of the flavor profiles. So you'll either get lighter style champagnes where that shows through a lot, or you'll get champagnes where they've gone through a lot more lees aging and a lot more overall aging, which will give you a little bit more brioche. And with that mineral coming in, it takes that brioche and adds a little bit more of like an almondy flavor to the wine, like an almondy. So this very special and unique soil also is very good for building caves. So here you'll see very deep cellars built hundreds of years ago in Champagne where they can age these wines for a very long extended period. The other key elements for the terroir for Champagne is that since it's so far north, the area is very cool and chalk does retain a good amount of water. So while it doesn't rain a tremendous amount there, you do get very good water retention, and anywhere where you're retaining water, the hillsides, like the côtes, always tend to be the best areas for growing grapes. So here in these colors, you can kind of see the different sub-regions, the Vallée de Marne, the Côte de Blancs, the Montagne de Reims, Cézanne, and then obviously set aside is Aube. All of these actually are going to be primarily on the hillsides or on the tops of the mountains, because while it's not super wet, you don't want all that water to be absorbed into the grapes, because then you'll produce larger, less flavorful grapes. Those in combination with the special and unique way that they make Champagne, the méthode traditionnelle, or as they call it in Champagne, the méthode champenoise, creates the style that people know and love. The way that you make Champagne is you start with your vineyard management the way you normally would. Nothing unique or special about the way that they're creating and holding the grapes there. But once they pick the grapes, this is where things begin to change. So you'll do a primary fermentation, and then instead of putting it into a tank, you'll actually put it into a bottle, and you'll begin with a little bit of what they call the liqueur d'expédition to do a secondary fermentation of the bottle. So the bubbles that occur in Champagne are actually the natural bubbles that come from that second fermentation. Then you turn the bottles upside down. You do what is called riddling, which is slowly over a few months. You give the bottles some turns. This will get all the yeasts to condense at the neck of the bottle, and then after either months or even years, depending on how long the specific champagne is aged, they go through a process called disgorgement. This is where they will take the cap off the bottle. Because it's under pressure, it'll shoot out the yeasts, and then they quickly will recap it with the final cork after they put in a little bit of the final dosage, which determines the sweetness level for the champagne. This now is done automatically with machines very, very quickly, so you lose very little of the bubbles, very little of the juice. But back in the day, this was a very dangerous process because you would disgorge everything by hand. So people would grab the bottles and they would cut open the caps and try and do everything real fast before they would lose the wine. So part of the reason why Champagne was always seen as a special occasion wine is because it was very expensive to produce. You would very often lose 20-30% of the wine either through bad glass, which if you had a warm year and you had pre-industrial glass, those contents under pressure would explode, and you could have whole cellars of champagne just naturally destroy itself. Or when you go to do the disgorgement, you would have people who are not masters doing it lose 30% or 40% of the wine in the bottle, and then obviously that's not what people would want, people would pay for, so you would lose a lot that way. So fortunately now this is all done, that at least that one part is done by a machine to make sure that you have the best champagne experience. The other key important element when you talk about champagne is to talk about the grapes. So the three most important grapes making 97-98% of total planting is going to be Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Pinot Meunier. When you see on a label something that says Blanc de Blanc, that means it was made only from white varietals like Chardonnay. If you see something that says Blanc de Noirs, that means it's actually a white-looking champagne that was made only with red varietals like Pinot Noir or Pinot Meunier. There's a couple of other small varietals that are allowed in champagne, but they're exceptionally rare. None of the large producers produce any wines with those in larger than 0.5% quantity. But there are some small grower champagnes that you can find that make wines with these quantities. When I talk about large versus grower champagnes, the big difference between those two is if you look on the labels, you'll be able to find a small serial number and with the words either RM or NM. RM means récoltant manipulaire. These people were the ones who picked the grapes and they manipulated the grapes into the champagne themselves. Those are known as your grower champagnes. Those are people who own the vineyards and took care of the entire process until it gets to you. NM, négociant manipulaire, can own and very often does own a certain amount of their own vineyards, but they buy fruit from other people to be able to make more champagne. So grower champagnes tend to be very small houses producing a few thousand bottles, whereas people like Clicquot and Moet, even some of the smaller houses like Laurent Perrier and Tangier, they are still négociants. They don't own 100% of the wines that they make. And even if they are making a specific label where they own and control 100% of it, they would still be considered a négociant wine. So even something as famous as Cru Clos de Menil, because Cru buys fruit for other wines, even though they own their section of Clos de Menil, they don't get to call Clos de Menil a grower champagne. So those are some of the most important elements that you can find about the wines of Champagne, and to make sure that you take advantage of the special deal we have on one of my favorite champagnes, Louis Roederer